Hello YouTube, today's going to be my first book review, and contrary to what I promised, it's not going to be about the asylum, but about this here. So, this is The Settlers of Catan by Gablé, and if you're familiar, you may have already noticed that it pretty much has the same layout as the game, and that's pretty much what caught my interest in it, because I hadn't heard about it, and I was wanting to know whether the game was there first or the book, and it turns out actually that the book was written years after the game was published. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, because usually it's the other way around. And I mean, this should have hinted at it. If you look at this, like the little resource symbols, that you can put those on the cover, which I'm kind of conflicted about. Like, I don't think that's just a game element that shouldn't really be on the book cover. But it's okay. It's I mean, the rest of the layout is great. It's also very nice when you take the dust jacket off. It's just a nice red book with a nice little emblem, and then it has a map of Catan, the island. I was kind of skeptical when I picked it up. I was wanting to read it because of the game pretty much, but I also was kind of under the impression I hadn't read much of Rebecca Gablé's work. But I kind of felt like she was one of those authors that just pop out a new historical novel every year. And I mean, the market is kind of like with vampire novels. It's really difficult to find something that's really good and well researched. And I didn't go into this with a lot of expectations into that, but rather just interest in how she would incorporate the game element. And she totally blew my mind with how well researched it actually turned out to be, and how well written in general. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how the book is structured. It's got 4 parts. The first part being Elisund, which is where basically the journey doesn't even start yet. It's the introductory part where you get to know the characters. It's a community of basically Vikings, but they don't call themselves Vikings. And you get to know, obviously, our main characters, Candemir and Osmond. They're best friends, and they live in, in Elisund. You get introduced to not only the characters as individuals and their relationships and their community, but just the customs and the structure of their society, basically. And it's just so well researched. Like, every other line, the author is throwing facts at your face. Like, every single little detail, like children's toys even, and of course food and dress and customs, and it's really fascinating. So a lot of people complained. Wait, I put a playing card here to see. This is how much the first part, the introduction, basically encompasses. That's a little over 100 pages, and a lot of people complained that that's too much, and they want to know about Catan. They want to know about, you know, how they got there and what they did there, and how, especially for people that played the game, how the elements of the game were encompassed in the book. And that a lot of people just didn't care what happened before, but I think that was really interesting. It gave you a really good introduction, especially into the culture, and to how the people think and what is important to them. And I think it was necessary to understand later on how they act, and you know, how their relationships develop. And also, it was so well written and interesting that I really didn't mind a long introduction like this. So then we have the second part here, the journey, and it always has like a nice illustration that may or may not hint at what is going to happen. It's always very, it makes you want to read fast to know what's going to happen. This is another, maybe not 100 pages. Oh yeah. Ooh. Yeah, it's another 100 pages pretty much of the, this much, of the journey there. So they, because of what happens in the first part, they decide that they're going to go on a journey to an island that is actually, that they know from legends, and nobody's really sure where it actually is. So obviously they are very desperate, or they wouldn't go on a journey basically into the unknown. And again, here it's another 100 pages of basically introduction, where you already see some character development and how the relationships develop between the characters, and how obviously, I mean, being on those ships, not knowing whether they will ever get anywhere. I mean, we know they get there because, after all, the book is called The Settlers of Catan, but they don't know that, and of course they're running out of food, and then conflicts start to get really really crazy. So that's another, through conflict you always get to know the characters better, I find. So that was another maybe a long introductory part, but I think it was quite well done. And then we move on to the part that everybody was waiting for, Catan. And that is the biggest part. It's this much of the book. And this is, of course, about them finally finding the island and exploring it, and finding a place where they can build their community, and basically showing how they do that. And of course then power dynamics start to develop. Who of the characters is basically going to be their leader? Do they need a leader? Then there's also some conflict in philosophy, because there's, I mean, they all are funded in a belief in the Norse gods, but then there's this one Saxon monk that came with them, and there's some conflict around that. Basically just a lot of conflict that that keeps the story going and keeps you wondering how it goes on. And the thing is, you can't really pick sides. Like, at least I felt like that it was both sides, like at least with the religious conflict, like the Norse gods and then the Christian monk. They were, like, they both had their positives and negatives, and basically I was just interested in learning about both of them, and not really wanting either of them to win. But then there's other conflicts where basically you have your bad guy and you have your good guy, and it's pretty clear on which side you are. So this is pretty much their first year there, and I mean, a lot happens there, and there's already hinting at conflicts that will grow bigger later on, but the finale only happens in the fourth part, right? But there's some more development and setting up for the final part, which is Gablé. That's a rune. You get to know a lot about Norse mythology in here, and of course, again, you have this picture here that kind of makes you wonder what is going to go down here. And I mean, I had my theories pretty much as soon as I saw that picture, and then it turned out completely different. But here was the only part where, like, the end of the third part and a little bit of the beginning of the fourth part, where even though the plot was moving on, I kind of got a feeling of it doesn't read as well as the rest of the book, and I didn't really know why. But that was only like 50 pages or something. It picked up again, and it was fine. The fourth part is 7 years later, or 6 years later actually. It's their 7th year, where you see how life has developed since then. I mean, they've settled down, they've built their community, but there's still conflict that have been building up for all this time, and then it basically builds up to your final who's gonna win, and what's gonna happen, how is it gonna end, how are people gonna deal with it. And as I said, I wasn't really expecting what happened. I wouldn't really say that it was like super exciting, like, oh my god, what is going to happen, but it was interesting. I did read it to the end, and I did want to know what was going to happen. So overall, I did think it was a great book. If you're into historical novels, you're going to love this. Especially since it's really early medieval, which isn't that common, I find. Don't expect too many references to the game, but do expect a well-researched novel. So that was it for my first book review. I hope you liked it. I encourage you to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next page.